So if I switch to the overhead view, keyboard shortcut 2, you can see where the camera's facing north. There's an infinite plane and we've got default Bryce lighting. I'm going to bring in an object to render, one that I made earlier. It's from the funky shapes and metals set that Haro and I made. It looks like that, but any object that is a suitable geometry will do. This was made in Wings 3D. So I'll just bring this object in and set my camera up for rendering this. I want to just rotate it a bit just so we can see a bit of the side, and I'm going to change the document setup to 1:1 so it's more suited to the subject matter in this case. So just a bit of setup here and then we can get on with modifying the materials and that. So there you go. This is what I'm aiming to get, really, is a shot of this cube, and I'm going to use a special effect material on a background sphere to create some highlights on this. So I'll begin by modifying the green area, the green part of this object, to a glass material. So select that, go into the material lab, turn the diffusion down, turn the transparency up, hold the Alt key down and make sure the transparent is set to fully white. Now it's vanished. Give it some refractive index so we can see it again. You can see it's green here. I'll modify this so that it could either be fully white, or if I wanted to mix in a bit of colour with what goes through the glass, so you'll get what's reflected, then what goes through the glass will be modified. So I could make it slightly yellow, so it just adds a bit more colour interest to what it gets to reflect. So I'll just check out of here now, and you can see that it's gone this sort of champagne colour, and it's only reflecting the Bryce sky at the moment. These red sections, this weave, I'm going to give them a material from the funky metal set, but any material would do. It's just I wanted to promote that product, that's all. So I'm going to use this specular material with reflection. I'm going to get rid of the reflection, actually, you see, and just use the specular highlight that's being generated through the specular channel. So you can see this sort of white highlight here that's scattering across the surface, give it sort of velvety look. And if I wanted to emphasize that effect, I could increase the specular output of the sun in the Skylab here, like so. In fact, I don't really need any diffuse output for what I plan to do, so I'll just turn that to 0. So there we go. We now have reflection of the sky, which is a bit boring, and the specular highlight on the object. So let's put the special effect background in, because that's quite fiddly to do. And before I forget, and I do tend to forget this, in the render options I'm going to switch on total internal reflection, which will affect the appearance of this glass-like material and hopefully capture a few more highlights, like so. So you see these additional highlights? That's due to total internal reflection being turned on. An important step in this effect. Right, create a default Bryce sphere, enlarge it to encompass the scene. Notice that now we're inside that sphere, we can't see the sky. In fact, before I forget, I'm going to turn the atmosphere off so there's no haze effect adding into the inside of that sphere, and set the atmosphere to fully black just in case there's any leakage through the geometry and you see the blue sky. So we're in the dark. Right, doesn't really matter, I'm not using shadow casting light here, so in the Skylab I can turn off the global control for shadow casting. So now the specular light will just come through that sphere, so we can still have these specular highlights. The next thing to do is to get my material on that sphere. I'm going to use this image. It's going to be spherically mapped around the sphere, and it came from this product by Haro and myself, but any sort of abstract image like that would do for this effect. So go into the material lab now for the sphere that I'm wrapping around the scene, put a blob in ambient, go to image texture, texture source editor, click on an empty square, find your image wherever it is, so, and then apply that, check out, and remember to switch to spherical map here. It looks grey here because it's got no ambient output, so turn the diffuse down and the ambient up to 100. Check out of there and give that a render. So you can see the background is actually visible, but there's not very many reflections visible. This is the grey, this grey swatch here, this bit, is the global ambient colour. So we can provide a bit more power globally by setting that to fully white. So you can see it lights up a bit more, and we see a few more of the little bit of highlights that I want to use to create the effect. But it's still not very dramatic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this sphere so it's a bit larger, so I'm not catching it in the scene, and then edit the material of that sphere so that I can pump the ambient level up above 100. I use a component from the deep texture editor, click on the B slot here for ambience, and then hold the shift key down, click on the name, and I'm going to modify one you should have, basic check blue. So I'm going to modify this. Normally your output range for this alpha channel, this is the alpha channel that's driving this effect here, is fully black to fully white. But there is a trick you can do to push it beyond that range or under that range. It can't display that output, well it does sort of in a broken way, but we can use it to create an effect. So go into the deep texture editor with this blob, turn off the color output and the bump output, so you've only got alpha output. Click on these gel-like buttons on the corner, that gives us dialogues to work with, and go into noise. Change square right at the bottom here to distance squared, standard to minimum, and frequency, using this control here, left click and drag that down so the frequency is -1. Okay, so if you've got that set up right, the last thing you need is 1 octave, and then you see it goes stripy. If you've got that set up right, you'll see the stripes. The stripes are indicating, in this case, you've got a highly negative value. Too far out of range, negative or positive, to really work for us in this case, so it could be used in other places. So I need to change that to fully positive first. I can do that by dragging and dropping that component into component 2. This component's still selected at the moment. Remember that when you drag it over it doesn't switch selection. I'll modify this one now, again, to nothing. That's at the top of the list. So you go from the bottom of the list to the top of the list. No octaves, don't matter. And then in the blend mode change it to difference, and that means that the difference between this highly negative value and nothing is a highly positive value. You don't see any real change in the output here yet because we've just gone from highly negative to highly positive in an extreme out of range case. So I need to tone this down a bit, I need to bring it back into range. To do that I'll take this nothing output from the first component and then remember to select this outer component here. So we're going to modify component 3, not component 1, and I'm going to multiply in the blend mode, and the multiply will mean if I can make this component small enough, if I multiply this hugely out of range now positive value by a very small value, I can get it just a bit out of range, which will be useful. So in the filter here for this component 3, select sine, and then left click and drag on the A value till it goes to a straight line. You might see there's some changes occurring on the final combination there. So get that straight line, and then the B value, drag that down, and your aim is to get these stripes to spread out, and they do that just before it goes to fully black. We don't want fully black, we just want some stripes, a few stripes but not many, like that kind of stripiness. So that will be an out of value range that's a bit positive over 100. Now at the moment, you can see that output's gone huge. It's turned even the low values in this image into fully white. But with no control over the output level yet, we can get that control. You go to this texture mapping mode, little triangle here, click on that and go down to alpha scaling. This value now is a multiplier for this value. So again, we're using multiplication to reduce the level of the effect. So as it goes down, you can see at like 1 or 2 sort of level, it's in a range where you can see the effect, but it's very bright. It's brighter than 100, which is the key. So let's see how that looks in the render now and see if it's driving our effect. So now the highlights that the reflections are seeing and getting trapped in the total internal reflection are lighting up the inside of this glass-like material. However, there's a bit of a dividing line along these top edges and here, because the ground is cutting that light off. So what I want to do is get 3 renders. This render, which is the render of the object, a mask, and then a render which is going to be a render of this object lighting up the ground. So for the first one, I select the ground plane in my scene and go to the attributes for that ground plane and hide it. And then I'll give that a render. We'll have a look how that looks now. So that has now removed the horizon, allows this glass object to see all of the background, and you get these highlights, which is the effect I was aiming for. The background, okay, because of the narrow field of view used for this still life, means that you need a huge high resolution background image to get rid of these pixels. So this is a good reason for using a bit of a trick here, so we can render the two parts separately. So if I go File, Save As, and I'll call this Part 1. By adding a number on the end, it'll just make things saving a bit easier, because it'll automatically increment that number when I use a Save As function. So the next step then is to capture my mask, which I just need to do an object mask. I'll select the object because I know how it works with this. So I'll select the entire object and then select Object Mask, and then render. We'll just have the white object on a black background. Okay, so if I go now File, Save As, you'll see that it's gone and automatically renamed it to Part 2, so it won't overwrite my original file. And then the last stage is to create a different render setting to capture the illusion that that is glowing. So this is going to be a little bit fiddly, but we can utilize one of the components we've already made, this material in the background for the background sphere. So if I go into the material lab with this and then just find somewhere to add it to the library, so I'll just add it to my library. There it is, ready to be used. Check out of there. I'm just going to delete that sphere now because I don't really need it for my background. So just delete that, and then I'm going to get the ground plane and unhide it, so I've got it in. Then select the green part of the object, which was the glass material, and change that for the glowing material. And then what I'm looking to do is put a simplified ambient material that actually corresponds to the effect on the final rendered image that we produced for Part 1. So I want to make this area look like it's doing the glowing, so I need that colour. So to get that, what I could do is I could get the colour value off that surface, or I could pick it off a second monitor if I've got it. I suppose I should show it for people who've not got the advantage of a second monitor. So here we go. I could get the RGB value from somewhere up here. So what's that? 255, 40, 75. Okay. Go back to Bryce and modify the colour in this swatch here. So just make it simply that whatever that was. So RGB 255, 40, 75. I think 40, 75, around about that sort of a red. So now that looks white because we're using out of range, but when we use transient rendering, which is what I'm going to use to create the effect of it glowing and lighting the ground up, then this will hopefully scatter that red light. So the other thing I want to do is change these loops around the outside, so I'll modify the material for that, reset it to default grey, set it to fully black, so it just simplifies the rendering process because I'm only really interested in the light that's being scattered. And we've got the ground plane there ready to receive that. So if I go to render options now, remember I don't want a mask, so I can do that modification there. You can also do it in the drop down there, but I'll do it here for simplicity. Go to premium effects, I'll lower the raise per pixel for previewing, select true ambient scattering correction, boost light, and also I'll lower the maximum ray depth to 4 to increase render speed. Check out of that. I've got no transparency material, so transient total internal reflections not affecting it, and you can see we've got this sort of reddish glow now that's going across the ground. It looks a bit noisy, and the way to combat the noise is to turn up the raise per pixel, which will result in a longer render time but smoother lighting effect. So I'm going to render that out. It looks like it's going to take about 3 minutes, and I'll probably then post-work process that, smooth out any further noise in that using PaintShop Pro, because I'm going to use that for the masking process in the end anyway, so I might as well give that a go. Okay, right, I'll pause the video here and we'll see what we've got at the end of 3 minutes. Right, nearly there now. I just need to save this file, so File, Save As, and that'll be Part 3. And I'll switch now to PaintShop Pro and bring in Part 1 and Part 2. Now I don't know very much about how other image editing software works, but I imagine that the similar things are possible, so it's just a matter of getting your mask to mask this object. So in PaintShop Pro it's Layers, New Mask Layer, from Image, go OK, and then select the mask and go OK. So I've now got that object masked off. I'll now bring my background in and I'll go Effects, let's see, there should be no Adjust. We can add remove noise. I could use Edge Preserving Smooth, and then I could smooth the noise out somewhat, so it just makes the surface look very smooth. you lose a bit of detail, but the detail is going to be in the object anyway, so I'll do that. And then if I do Control C, I can copy that layer, and then I can paste it onto that layer. And then I just need to adjust the layer grouping in here to get it so that this object here, I'll just get rid of this other one here, this one is on top. So I'll just position that so we can see what we're doing. I need to drag the background to the top and then drag the masked layer over the grouping, and that completes the effect. So this should now look like this glass material is actually doing the glowing rather than just being the recipient of a load of very bright reflections. And to sort of complement that illusion, this advanced render mode I've used in Bryce to create a nice sort of spread of soft shadow and lighting on the floor. So there you go, that's the end of the video. A little bit involved, but hopefully you'll be able to follow those steps and recreate it in your own renders. Okay then, hope you found that interesting. Cheers now.